All right, hey everyone, GratuiTous here from itsgratuitous.com. My website is all about teaching you guys how to make professional beats with FL Studio. In this video, I want to talk to you about what is an audio interface and more specifically, how to kind of buy an audio interface for a beat maker. Because again, depending on the type of music you're making, the equipment that you need for music production differs. So over my years, I've used quite a few different audio interfaces. So I have three here. This one in the black is the one I'm currently using, and I'm going to break down all that stuff in just a moment. An audio interface, in short, just allows you to plug in microphones, like high-end microphones with XLR cables, which we'll talk about as we go. I'll bring everything closer for you guys. So we can plug in high-end microphones, our headphones, our speakers, and it gives us control over volume just right from the front. We can control volume of our microphones. This one has two microphone inputs. We also have volume and headphone volume. All right. This one here actually has two headphone jacks. So I can turn up my volume just like that. And again, I'll bring all this stuff closer to you. That's just a quick overview. Okay. So an audio interface is just an external sound card that we plug in either through USB. Okay. So USB is probably the most common. And the older audio interfaces use this USB-A, okay, so, typical USB-A, Type A cable, and then the other side is Type B, okay, so a fun fact for you, if you have a printer laying around and your audio cable isn't long enough when you purchase your device, a printer cable, this is essentially a printer cable, and I'll share that on the back of the audio interface just for you to see, okay, so that's the USB Type B connection. Okay, so we talked about what is an audio interface. It just allows you to plug in high-end microphones, control your speaker volume nice and easy, plug in higher-end headphones that typically have a little bit more gain on the headphone preamp, and then it allows us to plug in our different devices. So this audio interface is a very simple audio interface in the back. We just plug in USB. That allows us to see this as a sound card in our operating system like Windows. So when I talk to you guys, I only use Windows, so all this stuff will apply to Mac, but you'll have to kind of figure out how it works for you. And then here we just plug in a left and right speaker with a TRS cable, and I'll bring that close to you. So this is called a TRS cable, and I'll break down the cables in just a moment, but I just want to share that with you now that we're talking about the connection there. Okay, so this is a front of an audio interface. So don't worry about if this model is good or not. Don't worry about that stuff. I'll talk a little bit about maybe some brands and stuff in the end. But at the end of the day, there is no real best audio interface. It's all about what works for you as a producer. And again, I'm speaking specifically for making beats. So that's going to be different than somebody who makes rock music and all that kind of stuff. So again, I teach FL Studio beat making. Okay. Again, you can find me at itsgratuitous.com. All right. So let's talk about the different audio cables, because when it comes to plugging in our stuff into this audio interface, we need to understand what cables work. All right. So again, I talked to you about a USB cable. This is how we plug in our audio interface. USB Type A to USB Type B. This is the older style. Nowadays, you're going to see things and they are USB Type C. Okay, and also don't worry about USB 2 versus USB 3 for audio interfaces. When it comes to music production, USB 2, we don't even max out the bandwidth when we are recording and stuff like that. Okay, well, especially if it's just like a microphone. But if there are newer audio interfaces offering that USB 3, that is something that you would want to take advantage of just because it's newer and improved, but it doesn't always mean that you're going to get better performance. So when it comes to music production, and again, I'll just show you that cable one more time. So again, this is a USB Type C cable. Again, very, very common nowadays. It took a while for it to kind of become more common, but finally it's here. But when it comes to an audio interface, the biggest thing is what we call latency. Okay, so latency latency is not something that is easily measurable when we're talking about, well, this audio interface versus this audio interface, because a lot of factors come into play. For example, my computer's over there, right? The white box. So, how powerful is my computer? Because that plays into audio latency. The drivers that come with the audio interface all factor into audio latency, as well as the hardware that's inside. So, because latency is for example, if we plug a microphone into the audio interface and we say a word, latency is how fast it comes back to our ears. And if latency is too slow, we get kind of slapped back. In other words, we're hearing our voice back, and it's really, really annoying. And this can also happen for our MIDI keyboards. If we're trying to play melodies with our keys, we can also get latency because of a bad audio interface or a slower computer. So when we plug in our speakers, and again, I'll just go back to this one. This is a very, very basic audio interface. On the back here, we have our TRS connections. And so this is what we call a balanced cable. And so this is a TRS cable. And it's important that you notice the rings. Okay, so there's 2 black rings here. And this is called a TRS balanced cable. Okay, and you know, you don't want to be purchasing super, super cheap cables, but middle of the road is going to be perfectly fine for music production, okay? These ones are by Monoprice. I've always had a really, really good experience with them. They're affordable and quality for what you get from my experience over the years, okay? So this is a TRS cable that we're plugging in from the audio interface into what we call reference monitor speakers. So now I'm just going to grab this cable because I want you to closely look at the amount of rings that are on here. What do you see? Only 1 ring. This is called a TS cable. Okay, this one is a TRS cable. So hopefully I can get this clear for you. So the one here on the left, the one I'm moving right here, this one is a TRS cable. This is the one that we want to plug in our speakers. It's what's called a balanced cable. We can run this cable much longer without noticeable noise. And then this one here is a TS cable. Typically, it's like an instrument cable. We plug that into our guitars and stuff. Okay, so it's a TS cable. This is not what we're wanting for our audio interface when it comes to our speakers. We want the TRS. Okay, so one last time, TS, TRS. We don't want this for our speakers. We want this one. Okay, this one is for our speakers. Okay, so now I want to talk to you about this cable. So when we plug in microphones, we are going to be using what's called an XLR cable. And it looks just like this. This is the XLR male end. So it plugs in male. And then female is this end. Okay, sometimes it has a locking mechanism, and this is what it looks like. So this is XLR. So we are typically we use XLR cables for microphones. All right, so we have either a dynamic microphone or a condenser microphone. We're using an XLR cable. So this one here is the male end, and this is the female end. So for example, if we just bring this up here, so something also to mention on an audio interface, this is called a Nutric connection. Okay, it's a special connection that allows you to plug in both XLR cables, so this one right here, as well as that TRS cable, and the TRS would just go in the middle, or you can plug in this XLR cable just like so. Okay, nice and easy. And so that would be it. If you plugged in your microphone, you could just turn up and down the volume. If you have a condenser microphone, you got to turn on this phantom power. And best practice is first connect all your stuff. So plug in your microphone and then you turn it on, okay? And then if you're going to unplug your microphone, make sure to always turn off the phantom power and then unplug your microphone. So last thing quickly here just to say about cables. So this XLR cable and the TRS cable, they're actually the same type of cable. They're both a balanced cable. This is just typically used for, you know, either like speakers or just kind of a plugging line in. And this is typically used for like microphones, but we can also use it for speakers depending on your equipment. But again, it all comes down to your audio interface. So for example, like I said, this one on the back is a very, very simple connections, which means we have to use this TRS cable, and it just plugs in just like that. So just understand that these 2 type of cables are what we're using. They're essentially the same cable. They're both balanced, but typically audio interfaces, and I'll show you this kind of more involved audio interface. You can see there's a lot more connections going on in the back. So again, this is called a Nutric connection. So again, we can plug in our microphone with the white cable right there, right? Or we can also plug in a TRS cable or a TS cable. So again, TS is for our instruments and stuff. This would be for like microphones or line in. Okay, so again, all these words are a little technical for what I'm trying to explain in this video. I just want to break down kind of like what is an audio interface and stuff. Okay, so that is it for the cables. Okay, so you want to get the balanced XLR and TRS cables. So let me just quickly talk about the difference between these 2 audio interfaces, because these are the level up So when you go to purchase an audio interface, the low-end models, it's not that they're worse, it's just that typically the connections, you don't have as many features to plug things in. So this is why I was talking about when you're making your music. So I'm specifically speaking to a beat maker, somebody who just likes to make beats with a MIDI keyboard in FL Studio with their drum loops. And they might just plug in one microphone to record like an artist who comes over. Something like this is perfect. You have one microphone, and then if you want, you can have a different microphone. It's always nice to have like a little bit of extra there, but you don't need tons and tons of extras if you're just like a beat maker. All right. But if you're recording a band, for example, like a drum set, you're going to need like 7 microphones or, however many microphones to record that drum set. Typically, you're recording the cymbals, the toms, the snare, the drum, all that kind of stuff, right? So something like this would not be sufficient. You need to look into, how do you plug all those microphones in? So that's why I'm saying I'm talking specifically to beat makers, and everything right here would work great for a beat maker. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this audio interface in just one moment. Let's just quickly look at the front here. So we plug in our microphone. Okay, so it'd be channel 1 or channel 2. If we are plugging in just a single microphone, that's what we call mono. So for example, for your voice, it's just one channel. It's called mono. But if you want to record stereo, you need 2 microphones, and this allows you to do that. Okay, so and then you can just turn up and down your volume. Dynamic microphones, we just plug in and you're good to go. A condenser microphone, remember, plug it in and then you can turn phantom power on. Then when you're done, turn it off, and you just got to wait a second or two because it takes a second to power down, and then you can unplug your microphones. Okay. On the bottom here, this is what we call like line, instrument, and then sometimes there's even microphone. So typically you want to put these like on the instrument because that is what we do for gain. Okay, so when we plug a microphone in, typically we want it on the instrument or the mic, and then we can turn up our preamp. Line is typically if the volume is already amplified. So imagine that you had your phone and you want to send the song into here. Typically that's what we call like a line level signal, and that would be, you put it on line. Okay, and then a lot of times you don't even need much volume because the audio can just go right in here without boosting. But if you want to record your microphones, you want to use what's called the preamp, which is in here, because when we talk into a microphone, the signal is very, very quiet. So we use a preamp to boost that signal. And that's what these sound cards give us for these microphones. Okay, so it's a preamp. As an audio interface has a lot of kind of different features in there. So the preamp, we plug in with the microphone. Again, you want to be on that instrument or that microphone mode, and then you can turn it up, your gain. All right. So channel 1, channel 2, the exact same. Again, there's that phantom power. Now I want to talk about this direct monitor. So these lower end audio interfaces, the ones that don't have as many features, again, it doesn't mean that they're worse, you just don't get as many features. This direct monitor, when it's a switch, this thing is not very usable. And so what this allows you to do is hear the audio. So for example, your music, but then you also want to hear your voice within your headphones as well if you're recording. And so that's what this direct monitor is for, but you have no flexibility. It's either on or off, but you don't get to control how much volume. And so this one, you can see it actually has a knob. So the direct monitor, you can actually have full control on how much of the music and how much of the microphone you want to hear when you're recording. This is very, very useful. And what's happening is a lot of these companies, including Focusrite, again, these are older models, their newer models don't even offer this. And I don't like that at all. Like, yes, you can do it in software, but for me, if I'm ever doing my training and I hear the music, but I need to talk to you at the same time, I like to be able to hear myself back. And if the beat starts getting louder as we're doing mixing or mastering or making the beat, then I adjust this as I'm actually talking to you because it allows me to fine tune the volume. I don't want to go into software with my mouse and adjust that. It takes way too long. So what I'm saying is I would recommend an audio interface with the direct monitor knob, okay, not the switch. The switch is really annoying. One thing I'll also mention is on this audio interface, I just put a little bit of whiteout, and this is like my one of my first audio interfaces, and these were like the listening levels I would listen at. I try to kind of keep it in that area. Sometimes it's good to always listen to your music at a certain level. You kind of know, you kind of train your ears for loudness. So for example, for one track to the next, you kind of know how loud to master that music, and that's kind of a cool little trick. And then over here we have headphones, right? And that's the same for this other one too. We'll just finish off on this one since we were there. So again, phantom power, that's only for condenser microphones. The direct monitor, the switch, I don't recommend it. You want to get that knob instead. This is for the volume of your speakers. All right, that's all it does for these right here. Just controls volume. And then we have headphones here again. You just plug in your headphones and you're good to go. If your headphones have more ohmic value, like the 250 ohms, sometimes these audio interfaces could potentially struggle to run those higher ohmic headphones. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. But I've never had a problem with my headphones with any of my audio interfaces over the years, my studio headphones. Okay, so that's it. That was the very, very basic audio interface. If you're wondering what this is just a special connection for locking the device. Like imagine you go on tour. Sometimes you can lock this stuff with a special device here, okay? And that's it. Okay, this was the first generation, the one with the black on the top. This was the second generation, and the second generation, remember I talked about latency? Latency is if we talk into the microphone, how long it takes for the computer to do its processing and then come back so you can hear the audio. And the latency is that delay. If there's too much delay, it's super, super annoying for music production. So the second generation significantly improved audio latency. All right. And I was really, really happy with the audio latency for this. But as I was progressing, I wanted something to have more than one speaker. So as you can see, we have different monitors we can select here, right? So like a monitor A, monitor B. So for example, if I have push in A, I can have one set of speakers and I can turn it off and then turn on B, and I can have another set of speakers. And once you start getting into heavier producing, it's really nice to have two sets of speakers so that you can reference your music, because it's all about translation, which you'll discover as you go through making your music. Because just, when you mix your music in the studio, that doesn't mean it's going to sound that exact same way out in the real world, in the car, on different headphones. So it's nice to have those two different sets of speakers to test your mix. Okay. All right. So one thing to mention is, again, this is an older audio interface, and just like the materials are kind of like some weird stuff's going on with like the plastic. So it was good for the time, but, kind of cheaper parts a little bit, but it still gave me a good experience at the time. Okay. So same thing, mic input, right? We can plug in our microphones, turn up the volume. A pad is if the signal is too hot, we can reduce the signal. So again, every audio interface is a little bit different, depends on what you want to do. A lot of times microphones have this feature as well. If the signal is too hot, you can engage the pad, kind of cuts the signal a little bit so that you don't distort. Okay, channel 1, channel 2, the exact same. There's our phantom power. We'll talk about this in just a moment. This one is for USB connection. So when we are actually plugged in USB with that USB cable, okay, so USB 2.0. So this one would just be like the USB connection. This is called MIDI, all right? So you can see back here. And I actually use this sometimes. I have an old MIDI controller that requires these old MIDI connections, and sometimes I still use this till this day, okay? All right, so continuing on. So again, there's that direct monitoring knob, which allows you to hear more of the music or more of your headphones, all right? So I highly recommend an audio interface with this direct monitor knob. Again, even the newer versions of the Focusrite Scarlett series, they don't have that direct monitor knob. So for me personally, I wouldn't buy that series anymore because I'm looking for the direct monitor knob. I really like that. So we have a stereo and mono switch here. I'm not 100% sure what it does for this audio interface. If it allows you to listen to your mix in mono, that would be really, really powerful. That's a really powerful thing to do. So like I said, when you have different speakers, it's nice to compare two different sets of speakers, but also switching to mono is also a very pro tip for mixing your music. You don't want to always mix in mono, or at least I don't, because it's kind of boring. The music kind of sounds lifeless, but when it's in stereo, it sounds really beautiful, but it's always good to test in mono for phase cancellation if your music ever goes to a mono system. And then we have a headphone source here. You can send like a different mix out of the headphones, which is, again, all these are powerful features depending on what you need. So again, here on the back, again, we have our USB connection, old school MIDI. Okay, so again, USB is now MIDI. So if you ever see an audio interface and it says like 2x4 and all that kind of stuff, what they're saying is like that's like 2 inputs and 4 outputs. So in other words, 2 inputs, so 1 microphone, 2 microphone, that's 2 inputs, let's say. And then for your outputs, you have 1 and 2, so that would go to like your left and right speaker. And then you would have 3 and 4. So in other words, you can actually have 2 sets of speakers off of this, but in order to switch, you have to do that like within the software. And it's always nice to have a hardware controller doing that for you, that you would just hit the button to switch your speakers rather than having to do that off of software. But you can still do it off your software if you want to set that up. But what I want to say here is you can see it's TRS cables again for the output. So you want to typically use the balanced connection, which is this TRS cable, and it just simply plugs in. And then that is your left speaker. So again, that's a breakdown of this audio interface. Because if you've never seen an audio interface before, it's really, really overwhelming. Okay, I'll just give you a quick overview of this audio interface. And I just want to say this is not the best audio interface, but the features you get from it are really, really powerful, and they really suit me for my beat making education. So let's quickly look at it. Okay, let's first actually start on the back. So everything we've talked about so far, you can just see, okay, now we're getting into some more connections. So this is what, paying maybe a little bit more money gives you. All right, so let me just quickly cover this. Now, I'd have to read the manual to learn how all this works again, because just because you read the manual once doesn't mean you know it, right? I'm just going to cover what I know here quickly, as well as what I want you to kind of know at a beginner level. So again, right here, we have our inputs, right? So the inputs are our microphones or whatever we want to record. So these are Neutrik connections. So you can plug in your XLR cables or your TRS or the TS cables. Okay, so that's our inputs. And then I'm just going to focus on these two, okay? So the monitor A is for the one bank of speakers, so your left and right. And then your monitor B is for your second set of speakers, which is controlled from right here, A. Now your A speakers are on, we disable it, you turn on your B speakers. Very, very powerful, right? But again, now you have to have 2 sets of speakers, the cost starts going up. But if you've been making beats for a while, once you start upgrading equipment, sometimes it's nice not to sell that equipment because first of all, the value usually drops as soon as you purchase stuff. And then if you upgrade to something like this, then you can start taking advantage of these kind of features to have 2 different sets of speakers, right? And you just kind of acquired the equipment over time. So again, this also has that old school USB kind of connection. It's USB A plugs into the computer. USB type B is that kind of printer style cable. And then this one, what makes it unique is it actually has a power option. So I actually need to plug in power to the wall in addition to the USB cable, whereas these two were only USB powered. Okay. And then one really, really nice feature I like about having, with my audio equipment in general, so audio interfaces, MIDI keyboards, I always like to have a switch to turn things off and on. And typically these Focusrites do not. So in other words, like they're always on. Okay. I don't like that feature of those types of products. All right, let's just do a quick overview of the front. So I can plug in one microphone for my voice. And if you want to record stereo, you can have 2 microphones, okay? Down here is that direct monitoring knob. So remember the direct monitoring, this one was the switch, which is very, in my opinion, it's useless. It doesn't give you enough to really hear what you're doing. The direct monitoring knob, this one had it, so that's great feature. But again, the newer models of the Focusrite Scarlett series do not have this anymore. And this audio interface, again, if you're interested in it, it's called the Mackie Big Knob Studio. And I just want to say, for the price, the features are really, really good, but the quality of the audio interface, it's okay. I already had to send in one for warranty, which Mackie did honor. So I got really, really good customer support from them. But one thing to mention is that it only has 1 year of warranty. So in my opinion, that's pretty low for an audio interface. You'd want to look for something a little bit higher. So let's carry on. So again, there's that direct monitoring knob, which I really like to be able to hear more of my voice or more of the music. I really like the feature of having 2 headphones. So when I do my FL Studio beat making training, I like to have one for like earbuds. And then if I'm making beats on my own, sometimes I just like wear headphones. Volume for our speakers. And so how this works is if you plug in two sets of speakers and one's louder than the other, you can kind of balance the volume in between there. Okay, so you turn up the volume globally as a whole. Okay, you turn up the volume, and then you can kind of adjust per bank of speakers. So tons and tons of ingenuity really behind this device. I really, really like it. Now, another really powerful feature of this particular audio interface, and why I really, really like it, is you have the mono button. We can mute the audio. So for example, if you like to set your volume at a certain volume always, but let's say someone's calling you and you're trying to talk, you can just mute everything. Okay. Then we have the dim. So if someone's in the studio with you and you're listening to the music, but you still want to play the music, but you just want it quieter, but you don't want to touch your volume knob, you just hit dim. It cuts your volume by a certain amount, maybe 50% or like 80%. You can still hear the music, but that's what the dim does. Okay. And this one actually has a talkback feature where if someone's like in the booth, I don't think this one you can't plug in a microphone, but I think there is a model up from this. There is the Big Knob Studio Plus, and it's even, I think you even get another bank of speakers, but this is all I needed. All right, so that is it for this video. Again, I just wanted to talk to you about what is an audio interface, because when you're first starting up, there's a lot to know. And it all comes down to what you need as a beat maker. And sometimes you're not going to know until you purchase a piece of equipment, try it out, and then you realize like, I should have got this. So ideally, this is a really, really good audio interface in terms of functionality. In terms of quality, it's okay. I'd probably give it like a C+, but even for me at my caliber making beats, I'm not like super, super pro, and this does me pretty good. Sometimes if I'm turning up and down like the volume knobs, like the audio can kind of like maybe crackle a little bit, but then once you get it where it is, you're good to go. But I'm just saying that it isn't a super high-end audio interface, but when we talk about all these features and functionality, being able to switch speakers and two sets of headphones, it offers a lot, and it really does provide me what I need. Okay? So in short, an audio interface is just an external sound card that we're plugging into our computer, which allows us to plug in microphones, reference monitor speakers, headphones, and the really nice thing is that we can put this close to us. So what I like to do is my MIDI keyboard, I like a 49 key MIDI keyboard. And the reason is because it's not super big and I can put my audio interface right to the right. So imagine my hand is like the MIDI keyboard, right? I can put the audio interface to the right. Now I can control volume really, really quick with my right hand. Okay, a lot of people want a bigger MIDI keyboard. They want like that 61 key. But when this audio interface is right beside you, because even a 49 key MIDI keyboard is big and a lot of desks aren't huge. So I've always liked to have my MIDI keyboard and my audio interface right beside each other for that really fast workflow to control my volume and all that stuff. Okay. All right, so if you guys want to learn how to make professional beats, check me over at itsgratuitous.com. I have over 34 beat making courses for you guys. If you want to learn drum loops, learn piano, all that kind of stuff. I've been training since 2011, and this is just a little free training for you guys about an audio interface and what to think about an audio interface aimed specifically at beat makers. All right. So visit me at itsgratuitous.com. If you have questions, leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you in another tutorial. If you guys would like to learn FL Studio, check out my free book called 5 Keys to a Successful Beat. So simple it becomes creative. Get it by going to itsgratuitous.com/5 keys.